We're looking at special cases of ISLM model. We started out talking about case one, where we said that investment does not depend upon interest rate. And we discussed in part one how this results in a vertical IS curve. Now we want to look at, given a vertical IS curve, the effectiveness of expansionary monetary policy and of expansionary fiscal policy. And by effectiveness, what we mean is the size of effect on output, when effective policy will result in a larger output response for a given change. So let's start with expansionary monetary policy. Let's say the initial equilibrium over here as shown is point A at the intersection of our LM curve and our vertical IS curve. And now an expansionary monetary policy is implemented through an increase in nominal money supply and thus obviously real money supply for a given price level, which shifts our LM curve to the right from LM to LM prime. As we can see, the new equilibrium is at A prime at the intersection of the new LM curve and unchanged IS curve. In the new equilibrium, we can see that interest rate has gone down, but output is unchanged. So in the case of the vertical IS curve, there is no effect of monetary policy on output. Monetary policy is completely ineffective in changing output in this case. This is something that we can graphically clearly see. Okay, monetary policy has resulted in a decrease in R, but there is no effect on output, and expansionary monetary policy is unable to stimulate output in the case of vertical IS curve. Now, this we can see graphically. Now, if we try to understand the economic intuition behind this, so we already talked about this, that whenever we look at effectiveness of monetary policy, we're always looking at how the monetary transmission mechanism through which monetary policy works. So recall the monetary transmission mechanism through which monetary policy works. We know money supply changes, that changes interest rate, which changes investment, which changes demand, which changes output. But now when you have a vertical IS curve, the monetary transmission mechanism fails. Why? Because now an increase in money supply will still decrease interest rate. This link is still present. When money supply changes, interest rate changes. But this link is no longer present in this case because investment does not depend upon interest rates. So this change in R will not translate to a change in I. So the monetary transmission mechanism fails now. This link in it is broken, right? Money supply change still changes R, but the change in R does not change in I. This link is no longer present in this case. So we have broken the interest rate link between the goods market and the money market. So in the case of vertical IS curve, like we can see, so here the crux here is that when investment does not depend upon interest rate, we get a vertical IS curve. And in this case, expansionary monetary policy is completely ineffective in increasing output because the monetary transmission mechanism will fail now. We still have the first link, that change in money supply changes in interest rate, but the next link between change in R and change in I has been broken, right? So now if you want to look at expansionary fiscal policy in the case of vertical IS curve, so here first let's look at it graphically. The initial equilibrium is at A at the intersection of our IS and our LM curve. Now an expansionary fiscal policy can be implemented through an increase in G or decrease in T. Either way, it will shift the IS curve towards the right from IS to IS prime. So the new equilibrium is at A prime at the intersection of the new IS curve and the unchanged LM curve. And as we can see in the new equilibrium, interest rate has gone up and so has output gone up. And what we'll notice over here is output has increased by the full amount of the horizontal shift of the IS curve. Here we can see that there's a output increases by the full amount. When we have an upward sloping IS curve, we know that output does not increase by the full amount of the horizontal shift of the IS curve because of the crowding out. Here output will increase by the full amount the IS curve shifts horizontally. Because there's no crowding out in this case, this is the economic intuition behind it. Because now I no longer depends upon R. Because why did crowding out happen? Like we talk about so when we're talking about effectiveness of expansionary fiscal policy, so the main thing that we need to look at is the extent of crowding out that happens. Where we know crowding out happens because expansionary fiscal policy causes an increase in interest rate, which reduces investment, and that limits the total effect on output. In this case, the increase in G still caused R to increase. We can see this graphically as well, but now investment does not depend upon R. So even though R increased, that did not reduce investment, and thus there's no crowding out that happened, and output increased by the full amount IS curve shifted horizontally. So the key thing to remember is that graphically we can see with the vertical IS curve how expansionary monetary and expansionary fiscal policy work. To understand the economic intuition, for monetary policy, we go back to the monetary transmission mechanism through which monetary policy works. And to understand the effectiveness of expansionary fiscal policy, we go back to the crowding out effect, which tends to reduce its effectiveness. And here we can see an increase in G will still increase interest rates, like we can see in the graph, but that increase in interest rate will not decrease investment, and thus there will be no crowding out in this case. So as a result of this, output will increase by the full amount of the horizontal shift of IS curve.